So on January 5th, 2026, something huge happened. But it was kind of a quiet announcement. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the CPB, the group that's been the bedrock of public media for more than 50 years, well, they voted to dissolve. The federal funding got cut, and just like that, a fundamental piece of America's media landscape, it was just gone.
Okay, let's just get right to it because this is the first thing that pops into everyone's head. I mean, for so many of us, the characters on Sesame Street, they're practically family, right? So does the end of the CPB mean we have to say goodbye to Big Bird?
Well, the short answer, thankfully, is no. Big Bird is safe. And if you look at how they're funded, it becomes super clear why. The models are worlds apart. Sesame Workshop, the nonprofit that actually makes the show, is a financial juggernaut on its own. They make most of their money from huge licensing and merchandising deals, not to mention streaming contracts with companies like Netflix. They haven't really depended on those public grants for a long, long time.
Okay, so if the most famous yellow bird in the world is doing just fine, it really brings up the real question. What was the Corporation for Public Broadcasting even for? And who are the real victims now that it's gone? That's what we really need to get into.
Probably the best way to think about the CPB's role is, well, it wasn't the face of public media. It was the spine.
Yeah, this quote from media historian Josh Shepard, it just nails it. The CPB wasn't the content you watched, it was the essential structure that held everything else together, the thing that allowed all those individual local stations to actually work as one system.
So here's the key thing to get. The CPB wasn't in the business of making your favorite shows. It was basically a pass-through. It took money from the federal government and passed it along as grants to more than 1,500 local independent stations. And that money wasn't for fancy productions. It was for the boring but absolutely vital stuff. Transmitters, broadcast towers, satellite hookups, all the operational costs that literally keep the lights on.
So with that spine now broken, you start to see who the real casualties are. And spoiler alert, it's not the big-name shows in New York or Los Angeles. It's the smaller, local services that millions of people quietly depend on every single day.
Yeah, this goes so much deeper than just one TV show. We're talking about a whole ecosystem of services that are now at risk. Everything from local news and public safety alerts to arts programming and educational content for kids. These are the kinds of things commercial media just doesn't have an incentive to provide.
Let's start with music. 96%. Just let that sink in for a second. 96% of all classical music you hear on the radio, it comes from public stations. And the only reason they could afford to play it is because the CPB negotiated these incredibly complex and expensive music licenses for the entire system. Without that central backbone, most local stations have no way to pay for that on their own. And look, this next part, it's literally a matter of life and death. The towers and satellites that public broadcasting uses, they're a core part of FEMA's emergency alert system. That infrastructure, the one that sends out warnings for tornadoes, hurricanes, and other disasters, it was kept up and running by those CPB grants. That reliable connection is now seriously at risk.
And you can probably guess who gets hit the hardest, right? It's the little guys, the small and rural stations. For communities in places like Montana or remote parts of Alaska, the local public station wasn't just an option for news and weather. It was often the only option. They absolutely depended on those CPB grants just to keep their doors open.
So, what happens when these trusted local voices just vanish? They leave a hole, right? A vacuum. And we know exactly what loves to rush in and fill a vacuum.
There's actually a term for this. It's called a news desert. It's any community where reliable local journalism has just dried up. It leaves people without the basic information they need to make decisions about their own towns, their schools, their lives. And when local communities lose that shared set of facts, it makes it that much harder for all of us to connect and understand each other.
And here's the thing. This was already a massive problem. Even before all this went down with the CPB, there were already more than 200 counties in the U.S. that had no local newspaper at all. Now, with public stations going dark, that number is about to explode. And what fills that void? You guessed it, social media. And the numbers here are just wild. A study out of MIT found that lies, these false stories, they spread 6 times faster online than the actual truth does. When you lose those trusted local sources, misinformation finds a perfect place to grow.
Okay, so that's a pretty bleak picture, I know. The big question now is, what's next? Can this thing even be rebuilt?
Well, when you look at how people are reacting online, you can see just how divided everyone is. You've got this mix of hope and total despair. Some people are saying, hey, it was built once, it can be built again. But then you have others who see the politics as just too toxic to overcome, basically saying blue states will try to build it and red states will tear it down. But, despite all that political noise, there are some glimmers of hope. At the state level, you see places like New Jersey stepping up to create their own funds for civic news. Nationally, new nonprofits are trying to piece together the essential functions, like those music licenses and satellite feeds. And there's a growing conversation about whether we need to regulate the giant tech platforms that have really benefited from the collapse of local news.
And that kind of leaves all of us with this final question. Back in 1967, this whole system was created because we decided as a country that having an informed public was a public good, something worth paying for. Now the media landscape has changed, the politics have definitely changed, but that fundamental need for trusted information, that hasn't gone away. The real question is whether we still have the will to build something to meet it.